The Dr. Ray Podcast is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio. Here's today's monologue with Dr. Ray Guarendi.
Don't leave me if you don't have teenagers, because I'm using this as an analogy. Suppose your teen walks up to you and says, "Hey, Mom, hey, Dad, I want you to know, having lived with you these years, having listened to you and having been instructed by you, that you've succeeded. For the most part, I agree with somewhere between 80 and 90% of what you've tried to teach me. And the part that I agree with, I'm going to obey. There happens to be 10 to 20% that I don't agree with. And I am going to do my very best to not obey. Now, obviously, I may not be defiant, but I'll be sneaky. I'll find a way to get around that which I don't want to accept. But you should feel very grateful, Mom, Dad, because I'm a pretty obedient teenager. Most of my friends, if they hit 50%, they're lucky in agreeing with their parents. Not me. 80 to 90. Do you realize how high that is? Now, I got to tell you, the only condition is I have to agree with you. If I don't, I decide whether or not to obey. There you go. When I ask parents, is that an obedient child? Not one yet has said, yeah, sounds pretty obedient to me, 80, 90%. Most of them, if not all of them, say, no, it's not. I'll say, why not? Because he decides. He decides what to obey. So even if he decides to obey 80%, the other 20% is still up to him. He makes the decision. That means his authority is over ours. That's not an obedient child. Here's where I draw the parallel. If you look at surveys on Catholic moral teaching, if you go through all of Catholic moral teaching, mostly in the area of sexuality, things like premarital sex, things like abortion, contraception. What you find is that a very high percentage don't agree with the church on that, and they don't obey the church. But they still consider themselves very good Catholics. How's that so? Well, because they're 80%. They figure an 80%, you go by the numbers, that's a pretty high percentage. The problem is they are deciding. If I don't agree, or I find it inconvenient, or I just want to live my life a certain way, and that particular moral teaching of the church is kind of confining, contrary to my goals, then they don't obey. They are the teenager. They are the teenager who says, I'm a pretty good kid. I go along with you most of the time. You should be grateful. Don't be a teenage Catholic. If, in fact, the church speaks for our Lord, and apparently you must believe that because you do obey 80% of the time, don't you? Or somewhere thereabouts. Then don't be a teenager. Be a full-grown, cooperative adult who may say, I don't quite understand the church's teaching on that. Or if it were up to me and I could just simply do what I wanted, I probably would not go along with that teaching. However, I am willing to admit that church was established by Christ. He gave her his authority. So basically what I'd be saying is, Jesus, I'm with you about 80% of the time on some of these teachings, you know what I mean? Especially the sexual stuff. The other rest of the time, I'm not real sure. It kind of depends. One more point. Can you imagine when the apostles were first starting to spread the faith? People who heard their preaching and said, well, Peter, I got to tell you, I buy most of what you're saying. I do. I don't buy all of it. I really don't. I mean, I'm not really into that thing about the bread and wine, you know. I mean, that's pretty hard to believe, but I do like your moral system. That's pretty decent. I can live with that one. Would St. Peter have said, come on in. Good to have you. You know, we just got to accept whether you agree or not. And hey, no, he would have said, I'm not there, but I think it's a pretty safe assumption. He would have said, no, this is a body of teaching that our Lord commissioned us to spread. All of it. Not the ones that you just want. And he would not probably have permitted them to be part of their followers. That's so hard to stretch. Is it somehow because it's 2,000 years later that we have that kind of flexibility? That makes no sense. Don't be a Catholic teenager.
More of Dr. Ray's Monologues can be found on his website, drray.com. Monologues as well as full-length programs of The Doctor Is In can be heard at AveMariaRadio.net and EWTN.com/radio.